Information. It's again now. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Whitney Presby. I am a natural resource educator with UW-Madison Division of Extension, and I work as the Demo Farms outreach lead for Division of Extension. Been partnering for almost 10 years now with demonstration farms here in Wisconsin. So we are really excited to showcase the results of this project that we've been working with the University of Illinois on for a few years now. It's been a few years in the making, so it's really cool to see these results coming through and excited to have such a broad audience. We appreciate the interest in this topic and looking forward to a good discussion today. Just to give you a little kind of a rundown of today's program. So we have a few presentations. So Matt Otto with NRCS is going to be kind of giving a little bit of a background on demonstration farm networks and the role that they play in addressing soil health and water quality. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Marion Skidmore and Dr. Chloe Wardropper, the two lead researchers on this project, and they will be giving both the quantitative and the qualitative results of this multi-year study, and then turning things over to Barry Boobles and Derek Rasper, who are both with NRCS Wisconsin, and they work on the GLRI projects, the Great Lake Restoration Initiative projects, and are very involved in demonstration farm networks here in Wisconsin. Before we get started, though, we do kind of want to just get a gauge of who's in the room. So I have a couple of poll questions that we're going to launch here. And let's see here. Okay. Focusing. Yes, looks like we've got some answers coming in. So this first one is just which state or states do you work in? This is, I know we've got a few people that are working multi-state. So if that applies to you, feel free to select which states. And then how do you interact with demo farms, just to kind of gauge what folks are, how they're interacting and familiarity with the work that we do here. So give it a few more seconds here. We've still got some folks chiming in. All right. So quite a few from Wisconsin. It's nice to see we've got the whole sort of mix here with the Great Lakes. And quite a few people who are working directly or collaborating with demo farms. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to end that poll and turn things over to Matt. And yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Whitney. And thanks to the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension for hosting the webinar today. And we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Skidmore and Dr. Wardropper about the project. We were excited when we learned about this effort from the University of Illinois, as well as the support from the Nature Conservancy on the effort. We wanted to take a little bit of time just to provide a little history and overview, as Whitney mentioned, of the demo farm networks, how they came to be, how they work, those types of things before we get into the results of the study. So with that, we could go to the next slide, please. So the demo farm networks or demonstration farm networks are funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, NRCS, who I work for. I'm a coordinator of the GLRI and work with the Great Lakes states. Previously worked in Wisconsin and was lucky enough to be a part of the demo farms network team there. Those really gave those funds that come to NRCS from the EPA Great Lakes National Program Office really gave NRCS and our partners a chance to think outside of our usual program box and take another look at how we approach things. And it's not a new idea. I mean, NRCS got started in 1933 with something similar in the Coon Creek watershed in Wisconsin, the first watershed project in the country. Even though we don't have the Civilian Conservation Corps, this is kind of a familiar and modern application of that idea. So the idea is to provide uh, that dedicated technical assistance along with opportunities for financial assistance for these practices we're trying to promote. And a lot of that comes through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So we also have funding from GLRI that we can use the EQIP program for. And the whole concept here was to identify and work with farmers who are really willing to try some of these new systems, conservation systems, and then share what they learned from them, share their experiences. And with that, spread the word. And uh, that's really the farmer to farmer, peer-to-peer learning aspect of this. Next slide, please. So a little bit of the history here. Um, Working really closely with partners at the Brown County Land and Water Conservation Department, Brent Peterson, Jim Jolly, put together the first agreement also working with the Great Lakes Commission in fiscal year 2014. And just talking a little bit about what is core to each of these agreements as they've developed over the years. One is a project manager, and that's typically an agronomist that works very closely with the farmers and in some networks also with the NRCS GLRI coordinators. And you can see the list of deliverables there that are in these agreements, starting off with field days, maybe evolving to small group events as the network develops, lots of signage, winter farmer meetings, videos, social media, some of the new twists on the old idea, mentoring programs, which are a newer part of the networks and growing. But the whole idea here was, again, that dedicated technical assistance, working one-on-one with farmers that were willing to share that experience with these new practices and systems that hopefully are benefiting their operation. We think they are. I think we have plenty of farmers that will say they will, that say they do benefit um, their agricultural operation, but also benefit surface water quality. And the name of the game here is trying to reduce phosphorus delivery to surface waters with those GLRI dollars. So those interactions, that technical assistance, the farmer to farmer learning, we see that really accelerating conservation in these areas where the networks have been established. And that's evidenced by satellite imagery that shows these green halos growing outward from these farms in those neighborhoods that surround them. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that in the presentations today. Also wanted to mention that some of these networks utilize NRCS GLRI field coordinators. So we'll hear from Barry and Derek a little bit later on, as well as University Extension natural resource educators like Whitney, who is emceeing today. Next slide, please. So where have we come since 2014? That's what we're talking about, where are demo farms today? Well, for one, it's now a measure of performance for NRCS and others in the uh, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Action Plan. So we report to EPA every year on the progress in adding new demo farms as part of our overall reporting for GLRI. And currently, networks have grown to 10 across 4 states, so 10 active networks with a total of 64 farms. And you can see the states there, Indiana, New York, Ohio, and Wisconsin are where we have active networks. We also have a network that concluded in Pennsylvania. And we worked with a really wide range of partners on those agreements, including, as mentioned, the Great Lakes Commission, land conservation departments, or soil and water conservation districts, Farm Bureau, State Department of Agriculture, American Farmland Trust, university in one case, and an RC&D Council. In addition to that, there's many local partners that take part in all these efforts, and we couldn't do it without them. But obviously, farmers are what make it happen, and we owe a huge thanks to them. I'm glad to see some of the farmers on today's call. So with that, I'll just mention the map there on the. Oh, sorry. If we could just back up for 1 second, Whitney. Well, that's all right. The map on the right there is northeast Wisconsin, eastern Wisconsin. That indicates the demonstration farm networks where we are uh, focused on today. And if there's any questions, feel free to reach me by email. But that's all I had. I'm excited to hear the presentations. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to stop sharing here. I forgot to mention, we will be doing questions at the end of today's presentation. So please feel free if you have questions throughout the presentations to drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that, but then we should have about 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the call to take questions, and you'll be open to turning on your mic and your camera if you'd like to get involved in the conversation. So with that, I will turn things over to Maren.
Thank you, Whitney. Thanks, Matt, for setting us up so well. People will see that map again, so we'll get to spend lots of time with it today. As Whitney already said, this has really been such a team effort. So I want to thank all of our collaborators here, the Wisconsin Demo Farm Networks, and all of the associated staff and farmers and participants and local agencies that have been involved, of course, GLRI for funding it. And then Chloe and I were funded in our research by the Nature Conservancy. There are lots of other, lots and lots of partners in this project. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you today, or start the conversation today, about the work that Chloe and I have been doing with our colleagues Sophia Winkler-Shore and Heather Kraska on catalyzing conservation adoption through peer-to-peer learning. Before I get to the research part of it, Whitney asked me to talk a little bit about how the research project accompanying the demo farm networks came to be. So if you're wondering why the University of Illinois is studying this program in Wisconsin, Chloe and I were both at the University of Wisconsin for our PhDs. And I stayed for a postdoc, and sometime between 2020 and 2022, I went to a demo, I went to a field day and met Jamie Patton, who's now at NRCS, used to be at UW Extension. And if you know her, she was in a soil pit and she was demonstrating the value of cover crops for soil health and for reducing nutrient loss. It was really compelling. And I spoke to her afterwards and I gave her a little background on what I do. I'm trained as an agricultural economist. I have experience using big data and regression models and trying to use these techniques to isolate relationships especially when there are a lot of moving parts, right? And she said, well, if that's what you do and you're interested in conservation and you're interested in agriculture, you really should talk to this guy, Barry, and learn about a program that's been going on for the last, at that point, a little over 5 years. Because, as Matt said, already at that point on the ground, she was reporting, we're seeing on the ground changes. We're seeing this green halo. We believe that this program, the Wisconsin Demo Farms Networks program, is really making a difference. It's catalyzing conservation adoption. And we have ways of showing that, but it sounds like you have other ways, right? And so if you're interested in collaborating, we'd be happy to do that. I was interested, but as we had more conversations, it became clear that part of the question wasn't just if the program influenced adoption, but how, right? And that's a little bit outside of my toolkit. I'm trained as an economist, but fortunately, through that time, I got to know Chloe, Dr. Wardropper, who that's fully within her toolkit. She's a wonderful mixed methods social scientist. And so we all then came together to try to do this paired quantitative, qualitative analysis to understand, again, how, not just if, but how the Demo Farms Networks program influenced conservation adoption. So with that little backstory, Chloe, we can go to the first slide, where, as promised, you get to see the map again of the program regions, the 6 program regions and the demonstration farms themselves that have been rolled out in eastern Wisconsin. The thing that really was interesting to me as for a quantitative study is the nature in which the program was rolled out. And so because the Demo Farm Networks program didn't just appear in Wisconsin, all the demo farms active one day. Instead, it was rolled out over time. And this allowed us to, for quantitative analysis of how the program was influencing adoption, have 2 points of comparison. We have comparison across space of whether or not there are demonstration farms nearby, and also across time. So to give you some intuition about what I'll be talking about in the quantitative analysis, we had the Lower Fox Network, as you saw, was the first to become active in 2014. It's in pink on the map. And there were 3 years between when program activities started in Lower Fox and when program activities started in the next network region in Dorkeywani. And so in those 3 years, we can almost think of Dorkeywani as a control group for that. In Dorkeywani, conservation adoption probably continued on as it would have without the program, which is a really great comparison for Lower Fox, where we're wondering, did conservation adoption change because the program was introduced? So we're using later arriving network regions as those control groups, those comparison groups for the places that had early starts to the program, and using that 2 points of comparison across space and time to try and answer the question, once the Demo Farm Networks program becomes active, does conservation adoption change? Matt already did a great job explaining sort of the nuts and bolts of how the program works and some of the activities. So I'll go to the next slide, Chloe. All right, so this is our first question. How much did the demonstration farm program increase conservation adoption? Again, a very quantitative analysis. I'm going to let Chloe talk about how it did happen, but right now, just how much. All right, next, Chloe. Great, so to do this, we used, again, this is really a data-based analysis. So the first thing we needed to do was to pull together data on conservation adoption, which in this case, we're going to just measure with cover crops. This is limited to cover crops, which is not the full scope of the conservation practices that were demonstrated, but especially in the case of, reduced disturbance manure spreading, we can't see that, unfortunately, from satellites. And it would be enormously expensive to find out from, every Wisconsin farmer in the region if they've adopted the practice. And so we limited ourselves to this practice that is quite observable using remote sensing data. And we're fortunate enough to obtain that data from a team of researchers here at the University of Illinois, Kai-Yu Guan and his lab. So they were able to provide in the study region a layer that describes whether or not a given point in space has cover crops on it in the fall each year from 2016 to 2021. We limit this to just agricultural land. We're not interested if there are cover crops in downtown Green Bay. That's a pretty nonsensical question. We're just asking, are there cover crops on ag land in our study region? And then we linked this with a data layer on the boundaries of the program and the addresses of the demo farms, which visually is just that map that Matt and I both showed you. From this data set, we then sampled 100,000 random points within the program area. So for processing purposes, let's just pick many, but not the full set of random points. It's about 1% of ag land in our program area. And then for each of those points, we can figure out if it was within 5 kilometers of a demo farm, within 10 kilometers of a demo farm, or just within the boundaries of a network that had any active demo farms. Essentially, have the program activities started in that region? And then we also know, are there cover crops on that point in that year? And so we're trying to link these two things. Does the likelihood that there are cover crops on the point change with its distance to an active demonstration farm or just program activities? We use this information in an ordinary least squares model with fixed effects, which is really trying to do what I tried to describe to you in words, using comparisons across space and time. And so this model lets us control for things like differences in soil type between points, but also differences in national level policy or state level policy that might have influenced cover crop adoption in the region. So our goal here is to really start to isolate that relationship between changes in cover crop adoption and demonstration farm activities beginning. And here, this is just a before and after. After program activities start, does cover crop adoption increase? In the event study analysis, it's quite similar. It's another regression analysis, but now instead of just before and after, we're going to look at single year windows and try to map out changes in cover crop adoption in the years after the program begins and look for trends that might be interesting. Okay, Chloe. What we found is that if a given point was in an active network, it was 10% more likely to have cover crops. Right? So basically, in the years after program activities began, the likelihood of cover crops on any given point was 10% higher. And this was even higher, closer to a demo farm. So if that point was not just in an active network, but within 5 kilometers of a demo farm, then it was 13% more likely. And we were interested in a point of comparison, right? So 10% more likely to have cover crops. What does that mean, right? We do know that conservation adoption is really, really hard to motivate. So I think Chloe and I looked at this and said, wow, that 10%, even that alone seems meaningful. But let's put some other numbers to it. And so there's a study by Park et al. In 2023 that tries to tease out the relationship between dollars spent on equip payments by practice and changes in adoption of that practice. And so we borrowed their coefficient for equip payments on cover crops. So for every extra dollar spent on equip, how many more, what percent change in cover crops would you find? We borrowed their coefficient and multiplied it by the GLRI equip payments alone. And we came up with an estimate of 0.06% change, right? So a couple orders of magnitude different, smaller than what we found just for that top level before after program effects. But the thing that we find even more exciting, Chloe, if you'll go to the next slide, is that that 10% before and after masks a steady increase in adoption in the years after the program activities began. So this is our event study where we break the model up into years, again, single years before and after the activity begins. Year 0 is the year when the funding starts, the demo farmers are recruited and adopt practices for the first time, program activities begin. And we would not expect to see a change in adoption in year 0 because relative to year -1. So this is all relative to the year before the program starts. If we saw a change in year 0, that would kind of be a red flag because there's not been time for the demo farms to influence their neighbors. Instead, what we see is that those coefficients become positive and significant starting in year 1, right? So the first year that neighbors could themselves plant cover crops, that's when we start to see the increases. And the largest coefficient we find is in 4 or more years after program activities begin. And this is really to us indicative that change takes time, catalyzing adoption takes time, but it really looks like the program, as it gained momentum, as there was more peer-to-peer learning, was effective at influencing adoption. And putting a number on this one, so the average level of cover crop adoption in Wisconsin is around 6% of agricultural land. Okay. We find up to a 3 percentage point increase. So going from 6% of ag land with cover crops up to 9% is a 50% increase, right? So again, quite meaningful, especially in the context of what we've seen from other programs and how difficult it can be to motivate adoption. We're seeing pretty statistically significant, but I would argue economically, practically significant increases in adoption, especially as the program has time to percolate. So that's all from me. I'll hand it over to Chloe to talk about the how that we believe these results came to be.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maren. So moving forward, a couple of approaches here, and I'll just pause for a second to remind you I'm Chloe Wardropper, and I mostly have background in sociology. Like Maren, I also did my graduate work at University of Wisconsin. So part of the reason I was excited about this project, working in Wisconsin. And this work I'm going to talk about was done in particular with a grad student, Heather Kraska, and then a postdoc, Sophia Winkler-Shore. Sophia did most of the interviews, so some of you here interacted with one of those two folks more than me. So I'm going to talk about two approaches that we took to understanding how conservation information and practice adoption spread across the communities that are in the region of this Demo Farm Network program. So one piece that I'll talk about is a social network study. So we wanted to focus in particular on information about conservation spreading across this area. And then second, we wanted to understand how social norms, so basically the rules that are unwritten, dictating what we think is normal in society, how that was changing over time, accompanying in the same years as this program. So thinking about our methods and sample. So we interviewed 22 demo farmers and 23 farmers in the region who were not demo farmers. Sometimes we'll call them demo leaders on the slides. And this was a non-random sample. So what we did do was we tried to have a fairly even sample across the 6 network regions, but that was somewhat tailored to the kind of density of farmers in each region. And we tried to have equal numbers between demo farmers and non-demo farmers. And we got a pretty broad array of producers. We had people who represented first generation farms all the way to 18 centennial farms. We had a range of sizes of operations. Average farm acreage, both owned and leased, was about 1,500 acres. And then the top crops represented were corn, soybeans, and dairy. And so most of them had dairy operations and some crop production as well. So to introduce the social network study, just really broadly. We're interested in how information flows between different people. So we used in our interviews what's called a sociogram, which you see here. So we asked people to think back to people that they talked to about conservation. And we kept this pretty broad intentionally because this program is pretty broad in terms of the types of practices that it's promoting. And so we asked people to think about who they receive information from, who they give it to. And then they kind of grouped those people in these categories of friends and family, other farmers, ag advisors, organizations. They also were indicating how often they talked to these people. And then we tracked who they gave information to and who they received information from. And sometimes and often it was a two-way communication flow that was indicated. So this is how we collected our data for this social network analysis. And so really briefly, we made these network diagrams for each of those 6 networks or program regions. And I don't need you to focus too much on these visuals, but just a couple of key points from this exercise. Overall, there was fairly low network density, and part of that is because often these programs weren't created to be really tight networks and groups that meet really often. So it made sense that they were somewhat loose. And we were including, of course, people who are not demo farmers as well. But comparing between the different networks is where there's some interesting differences. And the biggest difference is between Ozaki, which is the smallest region. It's actually the one that's actually at a county level, and Upper Fox Wolf, which is the biggest region at a big watershed level. And that's the least dense. So we saw the densest, most closely connected network being also the smallest geographic region, and the least dense network with the fewest connections being the largest geographic region. So one thing we asked and I wanted to zero in on was differences in communication connections between demo farmers, other farmers in the sample, and what we're calling program managers, which is those technical service providers who were in those agreements that Matt talked about, as well as a few other folks who were providing support for this program. And we saw that the most connected group of these 3 groups were those program managers. So that's significant because while there wasn't actually a significant difference between the demo farmers and non-demo farmers in terms of how connected they were, but there was a big difference with the number of connections we're seeing with those program managers. So they're a really important source of information. They do a lot of communicating. So it's important to keep that in mind going forward. So getting a little more into that relationship we're seeing between geographic distance and communications. So we did see that, the points you're seeing on this map here are all the people that we interviewed. Triangle indicates a demo farmer and a circle is a non-demo farmer. And this is just the demo farmers. We're not showing program managers here because they're not geographic specific in the same way. So we did find that there was more likelihood of connection between two farmers who were closer together geographically and vice versa. So, for instance, you see fewer connections in that really big Upper Fox Wolf area. We found that farmers in the same program region, kind of despite Upper Fox Wolf being a little bit of an outlier, they were nearly 5 times more likely to be connected relative to connections across regions. So there is clearly some cohesion happening under these program regions. And then as well as just any connection, frequency of communication also was higher based on closer geographic proximity. So in this analysis, I want to show you, this is actually not specifically a social network analysis. This was just a simple cluster analysis that we did because we were interested in relationships between a couple of different indicators of conservation practice adoption. So we're just looking here at percent cover crop adoption and percent conservation tillage on someone's operation. And then a few different social network indicators. So here, prestige score basically is how much someone is connected to other people who have a lot of connections. So it's kind of like you're more popular if you're connected to other people who are popular. Clustering is basically how tight a group is, how many connections among people. So if you belong to tight clusters, you have a higher score. And then in degree, centrality is basically the number of times someone is mentioned by someone else. So it makes them more central as a communication purveyor. So we found that the demo farmers were actually pretty evenly split between these two clusters that we found. So we found a cluster that we gave the name conservation leaders. The top row, as you can see, they have the higher percentages of adoption across their operations of cover crops and conservation tillage, and conservation curious. So these folks have lower proportions of cover crops and conservation tillage on their operation. And so this just indicates that the demo farmers are not all in that highly connected and highly conservation adopting group. And there are different reasons why that might be. And the folks on the call who were instrumental in organizing the program have reasons that they recruited different types of farmers to be demo leaders. But thinking about in the future, if new leaders are recruited and there's an interest in thinking about what correlates with conservation adoption, we see that these really socially connected people are also really highly likely to be adopting conservation. And so that's something that you might keep in mind as a program is developed. So a brief summary from the slides I just presented. One, we found that program managers were the most cited sources of information in this network analysis. We found that denser networks also have more communication connections and more frequent connections. And then more social ties were associated with conservation adoption, but I have to make clear that that's not a causal finding, so it's just correlative in our sample. So moving on to our next question, we wanted to zero in on social norms. And social norms as I mentioned, are basically the unwritten rules of society. And norms are really important because they can really influence changes in behavior and ideas about what is appropriate. And so there are a few different dimensions of norms that I want to explain briefly before going on. So, one dimension is called descriptive. So that's a perception of what others are doing. And that makes sense based on the name. Um, so this example on the screen is an example of a message using a descriptive norm. So it says a majority of Spartans are bringing their own bags for grocery shopping to reduce plastic waste. So this is harnessing the power of descriptive norms to try to influence people to use fewer plastic bags, right? Injunctive norms are perceptions of what behaviors are socially acceptable. So injunctive and descriptive are static norms. There's another type of norm that we were interested in, which is called dynamic norms. So this is perceptions of how behavioral trends are changing over time. So in this new example up here, the text says more and more Wolverines are bringing their own bags for grocery shopping to reduce plastic waste, and showing the baseline at 9% in 2017, changing to 30% in 2019. And recent social psychology research has found that perceptions of dynamic norms can be really influential in influencing changing behavior in conservation. So we wanted to do at least a qualitative study to understand perceptions of norms regarding conservation in this region. And this is kind of our conceptual diagram here. So descriptive norms can, show you see cover crops or different practices across the landscape. You can be told X% of people have adopted cover crops. The presence of those crops, those practices can lead over time to injunctive norms, so increasing social approval of something as you see it growing. And so a change to feeling like you should do something, right? And then finally, perception that continues to be on the uptick is the dynamic norms. So seeing it continue to happen can then kind of increase that circle and increase the feedback. So we asked a number of questions to get at these types of norms, perceived norms, of those same people that we did the network analysis with. So in the same interview, we asked questions to get at perceived descriptive, injunctive, and dynamic norms. And I'll go back to those if anyone wants to see them later. But just briefly, some of the things that we heard from our respondents were that most of them said they were influenced by their peers and perceptions of their peers' behaviors. Though 8 who said that they weren't influenced by their peers had already engaged in conservation before this program started. And then just a couple of highlighted themes that came out of the interviews on this topic. So a couple of things that people talked about here were regarding adopters. They thought that adopters were open-minded, eager to try things. They thought that adopters were also more willing to take a risk. And this is definitely something, kind of beyond norms that we know is really important, is those early adopters tend to be less risk averse and willing to try something. So injunctive norms, the idea of should we be doing conservation in this region. So we heard mostly positive things, but then a mix of, mixed opinions about injunctive norms in the area, neutral, and some negative, as in people didn't think that this was the norm to adopt conservation. So, for instance, I like this quote, the person who felt like norms were mixed around conservation adoption. They said some people see it as beneficial, but I'm sure some look at it as boo hockey, right? So there's some outliers, but they thought that most people found it to be the normal thing to do today. And then this quote around neutral norms is also indicative. They say, I mean, it's just a given. I don't necessarily think my peers really even notice. So that kind of indicates it could be something that is so normal to see conservation on the ground that it doesn't even seem like an issue. Getting at dynamic norms, most people did perceive increased uptake in the region. So again, focusing on perceptions here. So a couple of people said there was a lot more worked ground, tilled ground in the past, and it's all being adoption of conservation is getting more common now. And people thought they were seeing more experimentation and curiosity, evidenced by the second quote. So finally, we found people talked about the perception that conservation was less common earlier in the program with conventional ideas dominating. And they did perceive a change over time in how they perceived the acceptability of different conservation practices among their peers. And part of what we were interested in is future plans and the relationship between perceived norms and future plans. And people generally did associate their participation in the program and the perception of the normalization with their plans to either expand or maintain conservation practices. Again, just descriptive information here, but interesting and promising that people really were perceiving these changes. Okay, so just to wrap up from both my presentation and Marin's, a few final slides to summarize. So as Marin talked about, through that spatial and temporal study, we did find that proximity to a demo farm and location within an active network region predicted conservation, specifically cover crop adoption, over the 10-year period we were looking at. We found in the social network analysis that geographic proximity was associated with communication about conservation between farmers. We found program managers are a crucial source of information in this region about conservation. And the perception among our interviewees was that the social acceptability of conservation increased over time. So based on those findings, a few recommendations, and this is all going to be context specific. So these are fairly general and take them with a grain of salt based on your own context. But a couple things we feel we can say are as far as the design of program regions, for facilitating conversations about conservation, it does seem helpful that a program region not be too big. Again, we can't say how big or small, but we did see that proximity mattered for connections. It also, in our communication with people, they said they didn't always understand what the boundaries of their network were. And so if you want to have networks that are really cohesive, it could be helpful to have boundaries that are easy to understand and identify. Secondly, consider how you're recruiting demonstration farmers. So for instance, considering existing networks can be one way to recruit people who have a lot of social connections, right? So leveraging, for instance, in this region, the producer-led watershed groups, leveraging dairy groups, leveraging other types of existing organizations are one way to know that you can tap into people with a lot of existing social connections who can spread information and social norms. In terms of messaging, we didn't do a messaging experiment. Maybe we will in the future, but based on our qualitative analysis and other research, it does seem promising to think about messaging, especially leveraging dynamic norms. So saying, even if conservation adoption for cover crops, for instance, isn't super widespread in the current moment, you could probably say that it's grown over time, right? So talking about how it's grown over time can actually be really influential. And then finally, we found program staff to be influential and important sources of information. So supporting and growing that staff number is really important. And then just a few additional recommendations we wanted to put in here specifically from our interviewees that again are kind of specific to this program, but I think can also be translatable. So here, just reiterating, they wanted more staff for outreach and technical assistance. They were interested in equipment sharing opportunities. Some of those exist, but they were interested in more. They wanted more frequent events and reminders. At least some folks expressed interest in that. There was an interest in adding opportunities for less traditional farmers, specifically grazers, who represent a small but important part of the community. But also we heard from fruit farmers, other types of producers. And then leveraging and supporting those producer-led watershed groups. There was definitely a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of opportunity for leveraging those social networks. So I'll stop there, and Maren and I are excited to hear a little bit more from Barry and others and take questions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chloe and Maren. And yes, feel free to drop questions into the chat. We are going to shift gears a little bit to hear from Derek Rasper and Barry Boobles, who are GLRI coordinators here in Wisconsin, to give a little perspective from folks working on the ground with the farmers in the Demo Farm Network. So as I pull up those slides here, let's see here. Okay. All right. So are we seeing those? Looks.
Yep, we got them.
Okay, perfect. I will hand things over to you guys.
Thanks, Whitney. Like Whitney was saying, I'm Barry Bubbles from NRCS. Get the opportunity to work in the demonstration farm network since back to 2014, and I'm joined here in Appleton with Derek. Derek, you want to introduce?
Derek Rasper, based out of Stevens Point area, but I cover 3 of the 6 networks. Barry covers the other 3. I've been involved with the networks for about 7 years now or so.
So, well, thanks to Chloe and Maren for sharing some of the results and putting some quantitative numbers with some of the results that we've been seeing here in the watersheds over the years. And so we just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the aspects of how we're using the data that Chloe and Maren showed earlier here. And so innovative practices, that's just kind of a term that we like to use within NRCS, within the demonstration farms. And it really just highlights how the demo farms are basically the learning hub in these watersheds. It's an opportunity for some of our farm leaders, producers to really look at some of these newer practices that are out there. And so when we're trying to address water quality, soil health, there's a lot of times we run into roadblocks on, hey, how do we fit this into a dairy system? How do we fit this into a cash crop system? And so being able to work really, really closely with some of these farms on these innovative practices to address managements. And so I was kind of just thinking back to 2014, planting green. So planting, right in or no-tilling right into cover crops. Wasn't something that was common back then. Trying to get covers established within cornfields. Just the whole soil health system was really kind of a new concept back then. We had a lot of questions about how do we integrate livestock, how do we integrate manure while maintaining a soil health system, and so these are some of these aspects that we've really worked hard with these farms on. And so innovative practices, whether that's like grazing cover crops, that's a concept that we're starting to initiate on some of these farms. Maybe Whitney, you can go to the next slide. I gave you the example of, utilizing manure in a no-till system. And so years ago, that just really wasn't, something that we were able to accomplish. And low disturbance manure is now, becoming more common. And so because of these demo farms, we've been able to provide guidance documents, be able to bring cost share along to help make those practices more common. And so that's really just speaks to you know, the efforts of the partners that we've been working with, the land conservation districts, the agronomists, the demo farm managers out there. And so, next slide.
Yeah, so from the technical assistance side of it, Barry and I get to spend a lot of time with these farms. It's a lot of table conversations, one-on-one conversations. We're very intensive with the technical assistance, very intentional, goal-oriented. So, it all surrounds what does the farm want to do? What do they want to accomplish? What are their management, soil health goals? And then we work with them to implement systems that ultimately achieve them, whether it's bringing in new technology, a new practice to the farm itself, any of that kind of stuff. That's really, we have the flexibility to be able to be there with them when they need us and work closely with them.
Yeah, I'd just add on to what Derek was saying. An example of when we start with new demo farms, just being really transparent with them in regards to the intensity of the technical assistance that we want to bring to help these farms be successful. So, I mean, just telling them outright, we're going to be there on a weekly basis. You're gonna see us. You're gonna see the demo farm managers, that staff out there that wants to build that trust, that relationship. And so once that's built, it's a lot easier to, try these innovative practices because they know that we're going to be out there trying to help them through it.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add quick, small scale is often where we start, but the ultimate goal is to get, ramp up acres, and then, we do still have the opportunity to offer the financial assistance side of it along with stuff. Next slide. As mentioned by, Maren and Chloe, one of the things they were seeing was the impact of peer-to-peer learning. We've seen it ourselves, but oftentimes, we're having maybe early on in a network, we start off with big field days and we have robust numbers of, farmers showing up interested in practices. And then as it evolves, if they've maybe adopted it themselves, they're less interested in attending events. So we shift to these smaller, small group one-on-one meetings. For example, in the picture there, that's an evening meeting. A farm invites their neighbors and you just sit around and you kind of talk about the implementation of practices, what people are trying, what's working, what's not working, but really thriving on that, that close-knit proximity that showed up in some of the data. So Next slide, sir. And then network size. I work amongst the yellow, the green, and I guess it'd be maybe a blue. I can't. It's kind of a bluish green teal. So I cover a pretty expansive area, and just anecdotally myself, I've seen the difference between scales and networks. And that's something that we will take back, and after seeing some of this data that kind of reiterates what we were noticing, we'll figure out how do we maybe condense that bigger one into smaller sections, or currently we're in the process of bringing on another natural resource educator, so that will help also facilitate hopefully some stuff amongst the network scale, so we can have two of them focusing across three watersheds instead of one focusing on three watersheds. So we are utilizing some of this information to better strategically help our farms and get information across these different networks.
Yeah, I would just add, as we learned from this study, we've added demonstration farms over the last couple of years, and so that density, really kind of helped us pinpoint where we might have gaps in some of our networks, and so we're very strategic about adding demo farms to kind of bridge some of those areas that maybe didn't have as much influence. So.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar with Wisconsin, we've got Barry, myself, and then pretty much 3 project managers and now 3 on NRE that cover a vast scale of the state. So it's a pretty daunting task. I think I don't know, total, we're around 45 farms across the network now. So it's a lot of work for, not a lot of manpower. So we can figure out the ways to best suit everybody. That's where we're after.
Yeah, and so none of this could be possible without partnerships. I can't state that enough. I know when we were talking back about like technical assistance, I mean, we have to acknowledge, Brent Peterson, Matt Brugger, Nathan Nicey, Nick Gillett, Jody, for being demo farm managers out there and being able to work with them. They've been instrumental. So that partnership between that staff, the partnership with the land conservation departments, and I'm going to throw farmers in there. I mean, they're the most important partner that we have in this. But just from an example of, one of these partnerships, it was brought up, I think, by Chloe about leveraging groups. And so I'm really fortunate to work with the Dora Kiwani Demo Farm Group, and in that watershed, we also have the Peninsula Pride Farms, which is a producer-led watershed. And so just being able to bring that intensity of technical assistance to that watershed, plus having the producer-led model there, in my opinion, has been very successful. And I think that's a model that we can, utilize and really look towards, for other places or other portions of the state if we want to. Again, just the partnerships is what really makes this happen. So next slide.
All
I
right.
like how you changed the slide, Whitney.
I know. I couldn't help myself.
There are basketball games tonight?
Yeah, there might be a
Oh.
rivalry here between Wisconsin and Illinois tonight, so couldn't help but put a plug in and tell Chloe and Maren to remember your roots.
Yeah, I just again want to say thank you to Maren and Chloe. I mean, some of the aspects that you guys were able to pull out of this, just highlighting the need for NREs that we've kind of started to address that, identifying the needs of the density of these networks and being able to fill in some of these gaps with additional demo farms. And I think there's something to say about the data that showed the staying power, I'll call it, of conservation. And so, being able to work for, after 4 years and seeing that conservation really, really kick in and continue and stay there. So, that along with just the how important the boots on the ground are, the technical assistance. We are appreciative of the study.
Yeah, thank you. So we are now to the question and answer portion of today's meeting. So, like I said, we can do this in multiple ways, whatever folks feel most comfortable with. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question out loud, that's great. Otherwise, you can utilize the chat feature, which I'll be moderating. Um, again, just want to thank everyone for your presentations today. And if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out. Our contact information here for everyone who presented today, as well as myself. We will be sharing out the recording and the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation. So look for that probably in the next week or so after we have some time to transcribe the recording. So with that, let's open it up for any questions. I guess will kick things off. Maren, I have a question for you. I think one of the things that you in our conversations have talked about was that time scale and having networks starting at different times was, a challenge to overcome. Curious, now that you have the methodology established, how time intensive would it be to continue to run this moving into the future, and what would be like an appropriate next time to run your models?
Oh, that's a great question. So it is very feasible as time goes on, as the satellites keep taking photos and you all keeping track of where new demo farms become active to check in every, I don't know, throw out every few years, every 5 years or so. I mean, it doesn't have to be quite that long, but with everything written, it's not terribly intensive to update. It just is making sure we stay on top of data acquisition. And I think this is also something as others are thinking about or already engaged in or thinking about increasing capacity of similar programs, just making sure from the outset that you're sort of able to keep track of data from the beginning of the program, because then to Whitney's point, you can keep measuring the later progress that just keeps moving forward. It's really making sure that from the beginning of everything documented. So in our case, we were fortunate. You all had everything really well documented for us. So
Awesome. I guess a follow-up to that, Maren, I know we have, I was in conversation with someone from our Milwaukee demo farms. How challenging would this be to do at an urban scale? Does that seem like a nightmare, or is that something manageable?
we would need to get a little creative. I would want to speak with, of course, the practitioners, the farmers themselves, because I think there would be unexpected differences and challenges. Like I made a joke about not being able to keep track of cover crops in downtown Green Bay, which means that we probably couldn't use the exact same structures we did. But with, those good pairing of interviews and we could probably get creative. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll keep that in mind. Um, yeah, I guess a question maybe for Chloe. Yeah, I guess just thinking from an application standpoint, what would you say, from your perspective, are some of the benefits and maybe limitations to having the program managers play such a central role in that information sharing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because when we were thinking about hypothesizing, our expected findings before we started the social network analysis. We initially thought that the demo farmers should be the most important nodes of information as far as how many people they're reaching, because that's kind of the idea of the program, right? But I don't think that that's necessarily that our finding necessarily means that this program isn't doing its job. I think that partly because we're specifically asking about sharing conservation information and receiving conservation information, like that those conversations with the program managers, the group that we're kind of broadly defining, are going to be about the specifics of getting those conservation practices on the ground. So it makes sense in the context of that question. And I think that a couple other things to keep in mind is that we definitely heard that communication, actually directly talking about these things is important, but just driving by a field, right, as I'm sure everyone knows, is super influential for people. And so that's partly why proximity matters, because if you can for a few years drive by a field and see what's happening and see that it doesn't look terrible, you might be thinking, this person is taking this risk and trying this out. I can see that they haven't gone under or whatever. And so even that is influential, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the actual communication connections that we documented are definitely not the only connection here. And so I think that also speaks to the importance of, the signage and, I think just seeing the practices on the ground is important, but you can emphasize that with that signage and other communication. And then another thing to keep in mind is how those program manager folks can help broaden out the message by bringing more people to the table, facilitating more connections through those events, through different communication channels. So just, increasing the power of their communication node, right? So that they can reach more people, and in turn, those people can reach more people. So I guess those are two recommendations I'd have.
Great. Thank you. So I have a question for Barry and Derek, but I just don't, oh, great. Meg, I see that you have a question. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, if you don't mind. This is a little bit related to what you were just talking about, I think, in terms of how people are influenced not just by the information, but what they observe. My thought is it's really interesting to hear from Derek and Barry about how they're already thinking about the results of this research to shape how they're planning and thinking about the demo farm networks. I'm curious if there is already, or if there are plans to share these results in some way with demo farmers, because it really seems like it may help them to validate the importance of what they're doing over time and the influence it's had, and also think about potential changes or improvements or things that they might be doing differently. So I'm curious, if the researchers are doing that, or if any of the rest of the folks with the demo farm networks could speak to that piece.
Yeah. I will say I just came from, we had an Upper Fox Wolf farmer meeting right before this, and I shared some of this data with them. I had preliminary stuff last year I shared with them, and then I shared these final results with them, as it's sort of a pat on the back to them. I mean, they're the ones that put a lot of the time and effort into it. So this one largely focuses on cover crops, but I told the group, it kind of applies to all the practices. I mean, you drive around the landscape and yeah, you notice cover crops, but if you know what you're looking for, you notice the no-till, you notice the low disturbance manure adoption, you notice the increased acres of grazing or cropland grazing. So yes, we are sharing the data with them as much as anybody else and trying to get it out to them.
That's great, Meg. That was literally going to be my question, so I appreciate it. We're on the same wavelengths there. I guess a follow-up, and this was something that we wanted to, pose to the group. We've had conversations about how to best get this information out. We know that Marin came up last summer and talked to a couple of our land conservation committees in counties that have agreements with at the NRCS for demo farms. Obviously, today was kind of our biggest first step of getting this information out to a broad audience. But for those on the call, like, are there opportunities that you see for sharing this information, as well as other opportunities just to hear from demo farms about what's happening here in Wisconsin? We'd be curious to get everyone's perspective. So obviously feel free to unmute, drop things in the ideas in the chat. But yeah, I don't know if Barry and Derek, if you have other ideas, or Marin and Chloe, if you have anything else to add to that about just disseminating this information to as large of an audience or a targeted audience that we may be overlooking.
I mean, I do think there's some value. I know we just completed our winter roundtable events, this past week, but I do think like next year, just a quick little lightning talk on this data. The farmers probably would really appreciate that. Like Derek was saying, to know that, there is results being seen out there. So I think that's an opportunity.
And I think we had, speaking from the academic audience and our usual outlets, so press releases, extension materials, we generally time those with journal publications. And so the quantitative results are out, and we found, and when we disseminated that, saw quite a bit of interest. I got to do some public radio interviews here in Illinois. If anyone knows, Wisconsin Public Radio, I'm available for the radio. And so at Chloe, we're revising the social network analysis work right now to send back. And so when that's, really finalized, we look forward to blasting this out through all of the channels that we have at our disposal. But yeah, happy to do it. Happy to take other recommendations as well.
I'll just add, and this is Nathan Fickert. I'm state conservationist for Wisconsin. So first of all, thank you guys. This is great. But yeah, we're working on putting that out in some of our press releases, gov delivery. We're going to try to highlight some of it in our annual report and get it out with those various channels. And I guess additionally, and I've talked to Barry and others about this, but we're trying to figure out how to do it in other landscapes, in other places, and still working through that with opportunities for agreements and what we have for money and everything else. But I think it's a true success story that everybody needs to hear about and see how to implement. So yeah.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah. I was going to take a stab at Martin's question, and Chloe Barry, anyone can follow up. But so I would say I wouldn't necessarily extrapolate exact changes in conservation adoption. I wouldn't say that guaranteed 50% change in New York as well. But what I would say is that the fact that we have multiple types of analyses and on the ground experience all pointing in the same direction makes me feel pretty confident that the program and its structure really catalyzes the changes and the learning in a way that I would anticipate would transfer. Again, just sort of once you start one piece of evidence in Wisconsin is one piece of evidence in Wisconsin, we now have multiple ways of measuring the peer-to-peer learning, the catalyzation of adoption. So I feel cautiously optimistic about transfer, but would love to hear others' opinions.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, Maren and I definitely have thoughts about kind of extensions to the work and next questions. And for instance, there are a couple of programs in Illinois that have some similarities that we're interested in potentially doing some evaluation of. And we've talked about other types of programs like the farmer-led programs and whether we might be able to see differences there. I think that's a big question that we'd be really interested in hearing from people about is interest in different types of program designs and what you all are doing because this program design is particular to the Wisconsin context and they designed it in a particular way, but there's other programs that are kind of more ground up that we probably couldn't have as transferable results for because that kind of ground up approach is definitely a different design. And so we're interested in brainstorming how we might study a kind of different program design. Maren thinks it might be a lot harder to get really valid results for a more of a ground up program design. But anyway, that's kind of an open question invitation. If there's other designs that are similar, different that people are working on that you want to throw out there for us to think about.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. I do have one last request from folks. This will help with extension reporting. I'm just going to launch a demographic poll. If you were able to just fill this out briefly. Oh, and looks like we do have a question coming in here. So as that's open, I'll read this. Okay, a possible place to share this could be the annual producer-led workshop. It's a great opportunity to get the information in front of farmers from across the state, so that would be across Wisconsin, and could help bolster potential partnerships. Presenting here might also offer insight into how producer-led groups are currently tracking data and how they could strengthen their approaches to better understand behavior change and adoption. That's a great point, Anna. Definitely something that we've kind of talked about. I know I've had conversations with Maren about how producer-led groups, are the similarities, the differences, some of the challenges of applying the methodology that she used to producer-led groups. But I think those underlying lessons learned and the strategies kind of that complementary between what Maren did and then adding the social science part of it from Chloe's perspective, I think could offer a really interesting presentation to farmer-led groups across Wisconsin. I don't know if others have things to add to that. I know, Barry, you've worked really closely with Peninsula Pride, and they're a partner in the Dorkiwani group. So definitely there are overlaps here in this part of the state, but demo farms are kind of the predominant groups in Northeast Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the need to share it with like the producer-led group, like Peninsula Pride. I mean, they keep pretty good records of conservation practices implemented each year, and so this would just be another aspect that shows that we're moving in the right direction. And so yeah, it'd be good to share with them.
And I do just want to put a plug in for some of my colleagues in economics. Andrew Stevens and Jeff Hadachek at UW have been doing some program evaluation of the producer-led groups and are finding increased adoption across the state in places where those groups are active as well. So, definitely there's work ongoing in that, on the quantitative side for that as well.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments? A couple more minutes here before we wrap up.
Whitney, can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Hey, Miranda.
Okay, sorry, driving back from the winter farmer meeting, so tuning in as I can. But yeah, we were actively talking with a couple of producer-led guys in our demo network while this meeting was going on about how applicable some of the findings could be to them as well, and to echo Meg's sentiment about sharing it with the demo farmers to help bolster attitudes about, and knowledge of the fact that these programs are helping and working. We talked about doing that across some of the producer-led groups as well to, provide support for some of these things that are anecdotally we know they're happening, but it's great to be able to actually put a number to that and say, no, we know this is working. So just to add a little support from that. And also I heard a couple of requests directly from the producer-led demo farmers we have that they would like to share these across their network. I think there's definitely support for that.
Great. Thank you for adding that. And that is a reminder. So when we send out the follow-up to today's presentation, we hope to have a one-pager front and back summary of both the quantitative and the qualitative work to share. So keep an eye out for that as well. We have another question here from Jeff. Do we have any data to compare new cover crop adoption in the demo farm territory versus parts of Wisconsin that don't have demo farms?
Yeah, Jeff, this is a great question. So we did intentionally leave the rest of Wisconsin out, just sort of was a methodological choice on my part. It would be possible with, to do that, to pull in data on the rest of Wisconsin. Only concern there would be like selection that, the good folks at NRCS Wisconsin didn't pick these regions at random. And so are they necessarily comparable would be the biggest. The farther you get from the current program region, the more we'd worry about that point of comparison. So that was why I made that choice initially, but it is feasible to expand. Anyway, so no, we don't have data right now.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in right now. So again, I just want to thank all of our presenters. I thank everyone for tuning in today. We really appreciate the interest that you had in this project. And again, thank you, Maren and Chloe, for sharing this great work and partnering with us on this project. We really appreciate it and look forward to maybe future collaborations.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm gonna...